Hey, you, I am actually recording this after the upcoming episode is going to play for you. And the reason why is I want to let you know a little secret, maybe not so secret. We are transforming the podcast. We are going to be taking it from triggered, can we play with that, to drumroll, please, empowered human. Yes, I've been slipping it in here and there. It is really integral to the core of all of my work, of all of my communication, that empowerment is at the core. And so, as we've been developing empowered humans, both on the podcast and off, we've realized we need a transition, we need a transformation. We really need to honor that empowerment is at the core of our messaging. And so, we have worked with some professionals, and it is time for us to change the show title. There will be some artwork changes, some music shifts, but you will still have me as your host. We will still be leaning into our edge. We will still be invited to be curious, but most of all, instead of just transforming hard conversations into teachable moments around our triggers and the things that are uncomfortable, we're really going to be focusing on how do you heal your humanity in spite of this, because of this, due to this, whatever the connection is to the triggers that you have as a human being. Empowered human is really going to focus on, now, how do we give you skills to heal that humanity, the humanity within you, within me, and within the world at large. So I hope that you'll continue to stay tuned in. I am absolutely terrified that we're going to have this shift. And I'm like, when have all the people go? But genuinely, I have to believe that if I trust what my core message is for me, how I live my life as an empowered human, and how I have so many of you who are saying you also want to live that empowered human life. So I have to believe that this is the right move for you, for me, and for the world at large. So I thank you for listening in. I hope that you continue to listen in to this upcoming episode and to every episode after that. Thanks so much. And of course, y'all stay curious. And also, stay tuned. Follow me on Instagram at Drama Therapist Nina for more. Hey, you empowered human, Nina Garcia here. You are officially listening to Triggered. Can we play with that wherever you get your podcasts? We specialize in this podcast on transforming hard conversations into teachable moments. Today's episode, of course, is going to invite you to explore triggers around a particular facet of humanity. And I am intentionally inviting you to play with it, to engage with it in a way that is different than you might have explored it previously. We do have a special guest on today's episode. Usually you all get to hear me explore a story. We go through some tools and tips on how to deal with the triggers around that so you can move through and live your most vibrant and most expressive life. Well, today's special guest is Amanda Blackwood. Amanda is going to walk with us through a very particular part of humanity, right? This facet of humanity. And the facet that we're exploring today, take a breath in, is going to be around trauma recovery. And very specifically for those out there who were like, yes, that's where I am on my journey. I want to talk about trauma. I want to talk about recovery. And guess what, folks? I want to talk about the intersection of trauma and recovery. Then this episode may well be for you, folks. The one bit that I will share is Amanda's going to walk us through a part of her own journey and how she found forgiveness after her own human trafficking, okay? After she very specifically was trafficked. And so this is an incredibly empowering episode. If you have noticed fear or anxiety or trepidation right now, feel free to pause the episode and really check in with yourself. Ask yourself, is this where I am on my journey? Do I get to explore this at this point? Because in particular for us, if you have found us and you are here with us, what I can promise you is that we play with really scary things. We do it, and it is not usually as scary as people think it will be once we have moved through and gotten to the end. But this is your invitation to make sure that you listen through to the end. That is where you will find your relief in being able to say, I walked through it and moved forward, right? So this episode is full of so much goodness. I am inviting you to listen in. I'm inviting you to transform that hard conversation into teachable moments around this. This is Amanda walking us through trauma recovery and finding forgiveness. So at this point, before we launch in, folks, you know that I'm curious. Are you ready to play?
Welcome to Triggered. Can we play with that? You know that moment when your emotions ramp up in an instant, leaving you feeling helpless, frozen, or out of control? In that moment, you've been emotionally hijacked, the very definition of triggered. And I want to ask you, can we play with that? I'm Nina L. Garcia, drama therapist and empowerment coach of Houston Creative Arts Therapy. Join me as we discover ways to empower you and the people who mean the most to you to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Triggered. Real playful. Real respectful. Real empowered.
Let's take a breath. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Amanda Blackwood. Such a strong name.
Thank you. I love my name. It's not my legal name. This is the name I go by for safety reasons, but I love my last name. I think it's fun.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, and also giving us a little window there into what we might be exploring as we move forward into this podcast episode. But of course, before we do, I want to invite us to, transform, of course, hard conversations into teachable moments throughout this episode. And one of the things that I think so many more of us could really use is understanding that we get to consent whether or not we would like to do that, right? People will ask us questions. They'll try to get into our business intentionally or unintentionally. And we really can't say, no, I don't want to consent to go there, right? I don't want to play with that today. But because you and I have intentionally showed up to do this, I still like to say, can we consent to move forward, to step into sticky, uncomfortable territory potentially, and still say, I've got your back, you've got my back. And, if we don't consent to moving into an area, that's okay. Otherwise, we consent to moving forward. How are you feeling about that?
I consent to all of it. I feel like we're in a safe space and we know how to communicate safely in these areas.
Thank you so much for sharing that and that energetic feedback as well, Amanda. Okay, so I know that typically when people come into the podcast, they've shared a little bit in a survey about, what's going on, what they want to speak out, how we can get that human to human connection moving. And your one-liner and title, right? The title of your moment was Custom Justice. I want to know more about what is this custom justice. I also know this is a book, your book. Yes. Okay, we're going to talk more about this. And your one-liner, and this is for everyone out there, here's what we're about to get into, right? Was surviving human trafficking was no small miracle, but finding forgiveness in the aftermath seemed impossible. I almost feel like there's like a ... there. I know we're going to lean in. We're going to explore these things. And even as I share this, Amanda, what is sitting with you? What are you noticing coming up? What do you want people to know about where you are in this moment, considering custom justice and potentially surviving human trafficking being something we're going to explore in a moment?
One of the things that's really kind of bubbling in me right now is I'm dealing with a hive outbreak. And this is a chronic immune issue that I've had now for the last several years. So even when we move beyond these traumas and these experiences, they can have lasting impacts in our systems. We can heal our brains and our hearts, but sometimes our bodies take a lot longer to catch up.
Isn't this the truth? For everyone out there, now is already the time to get out those journals that I always tell you to have in hand, right? Or your really good friend to dialogue with. Already we're coming up with the reality of, first off, this alignment bit, right? Thoughts and feelings might be one thing that we're working on. Body is the other bit, right? Thoughts, feelings, and behavior. That's somatic part of the body needing to work through and heal all these bits so that we can really be in alignment, with our healing process and our journey. So psychosomatic responses are some of the things that our body can show up with, everyone. I am no stranger to this as well. So I know that this will not be something that is odd for everyone out there. Before we lean in, as we're talking about healing, as we're talking about trauma, one of the things that I loved, Amanda, when I went to your website, the first thing that I saw, right, short of the image that's there, the first words that I see are take control of your own trauma recovery. And it really spoke to me. Yes, I'm a trauma specialist in therapy, right? But it spoke to me not as a therapist. It spoke to me as a person who had PTSD for 12 years, did not go to therapy for it until maybe year 12, right? To work through the last little bits. I had my own healing process and I was taking control of this and my own recovery process for years and years. And so I share this to you and also to my viewers to really take ownership on therapy is the process that some people need. Mentorship is the process that some people need. Coaching is the process that some people need. But the reality of taking control of what you can control in your own recovery process is no matter what pathway you choose, that is going to be there. You've got to take control of that recovery process as your own. It's your story. You got to own it, right? Nobody else can give us this. So I'm going to stop talking. I want to roll the ball on over to you. You have this moment, custom justice. We've got your one-liner. What would you like to share in a nutshell with us? We're listening.
So trauma affects us in so many ways. Now, and you kind of touched on that. I know what you do is just so important in the world, and we need people like you. We need to hear these messages. But when we build up these neurosynapses and we start to reinforce them by not fighting back against these trauma reactions that we have based on triggers and being triggered, then all we're doing is reinforcing bad habits. And there can be some seriously long-term consequences to all of that. So I grew up in a world of extreme abuse, molestation, physical violence, emotional manipulation, all of this from every member of my immediate family. So I was treated as a sex object when I was as young as 4, as far as I can remember. So it's not surprising that by the time I was 18, I was seeking out relationships with people who were more than twice my age. And that's when I got into trafficking. I was manipulated. I was violently offended. I was trafficked 3 different times in my life. And one of the things that I like to address is people always ask me, well, how old were you when you were trafficked? Because here in the US, we have this predisposition to believing that trafficking only happens to minors being kidnapped by total strangers in windowless vans, when in reality is completely different from that.
Educate us, please.
So the Department of Homeland Security defines human trafficking as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. So if you notice, there's one thing that's not mentioned is money. So human trafficking does not equal prostitution or the other way around. So not mentioned is transportation, which means human smuggling is a separate issue from human trafficking, although they do overlap a lot, just like prostitution. And it doesn't mention anything about age. So the last time I was trafficked, I was actually 31 years old. I was trafficked by a police officer, somebody I had known for 7 years and thought I could trust. I was engaged to be married to this man. I know it's a little bit mind-blowing. It's
yeah. For the listeners out there who can't see, right? They're not on YouTube. My hand went up to my head and I feel this feeling in my chest. I'm speechless. By the man you were engaged to be married, had known for 7 years, was a police officer. I mean, there's so many layers here of you should have been safe, quote unquote, right? And I always say flag those shoulds.
right.
Amanda, what happened? At 31.
At 31, I didn't want to survive. So there were some extremely dark days in there. I nearly took my own life. It wasn't until years later that I discovered that what I had been through had even been called human trafficking, because I expected it to look like the movie Taken, or I thought all human trafficking victims were either victims of kidnapping or victims of prostitution. I didn't understand that this could happen by somebody forcing you to remain in their home while other people pay to violate you. I had no clue. I just knew that it was abusive and I needed to get out of there. I also learned the same year that I discovered that this was human trafficking, that less than 2% of all victims survive.
Less than 2% survive?
Most of them die of drug overdose or alcohol poisoning, or they're beaten to death, or they're starved to death, or they commit suicide. I nearly was taken out by a kidney infection shortly after he got me under his control. I nearly killed myself. There were several different times that I tried to end everything just because
Same.
I didn't care anymore. And getting
Absolutely.
out of there was, oh my gosh, it was a nightmare. It was so scary. I had to manipulate him. So one of the things that I had done when I was in my late teens and early 20s was I started on my own,
Mhm.
educating myself on little pieces of psychology. I
Yes.
wanted to know why the brain works certain ways and why these patterns had been built in my life. Why did these things continually happen to me? Because I know I wasn't at
Mm.
fault when I was 4 years old, but what about when I was 12? What about when I was 13? What about when I was 15?
Mm.
I
Mm.
needed to know. So in studying all this, I learned about what used to be referred to as Stockholm syndrome, is now known as trauma bonding.
Mm.
And I wanted to make him believe that I had developed a strong enough trauma bond with him that even though he didn't marry me, I was going to run out of my visa. And if they didn't send me back to the US,
Mhm.
then I would overstay my visa and never be allowed back into the UK. So this happened in Scotland. And if he sent me back,
Mhm.
I could live there for 6 months and then return for another 6 months on another visa. But if I
Mhm.
overstayed my visa, he could even lose his job. And we certainly didn't want that, did we?
No, not that. Mm.
Within
Mhm.
2 hours, he bought me a round trip flight to leave. I got
Wow.
back to the US and he hunted me down. He came to find me, saw him knocking on the neighbor's door one day.
Mhm.
And I didn't open the door, of course. And I was so new there, the neighbors didn't know who I was, but he had my address off by one number. I don't know if he was there to end my life or
Mhm.
if he was there to beg me to come back or if he was there to apologize. I didn't care. It
Boom.
was not my place to give him that space to allow him into my life at all at that point.
Not your responsibility. Boom. Thank you for saying that. Gosh, for everyone who needs to hear that out there, it's not your responsibility.
Right. And one of the other things that I learned through all of this was
Mhm.
that power of forgiveness does not mean that you're welcoming this person back into your life.
Mm-mm.
You know, we hear it all the time. If you accidentally stepped on my toes, you would probably reach over and touch me on the arm and go, "Oh, I'm so sorry." My immediate response would be, "Oh, it's okay. It was an accident. You didn't mean to hurt me.
You
Of
didn't
course
mean
it's
to hurt me.
okay. I'm not going
Mhm.
to hold that against you. I'm not going to be mad at you."
Mhm.
We're conditioned to believe that's what an apology is. The hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my life is receive multiple apologies that I'll never actually get from that person and to accept those. Not because I want to tell them that it's okay, because what they did to me is not okay. It will never be okay.
Boom.
And they will never have space in my life again. But that doesn't mean that I have to hang on to this bitterness and this
Mm.
rage and this anger and all of these things that were controlling me from one day to the next and making me live in fear. I was done with all of that. And when I
Yes.
discovered that that's what forgiveness actually was,
Mm.
by that point, I had already forgiven everybody in my life that had ever hurt me. I had walked away from all of them. I didn't allow them back into my life. They weren't going to control my mindset. They weren't going to make me mad
Mhm.
and upset and angry. I was going to live my life because I was still alive. I was happy to still be alive, especially when I learned that 2% statistic. Oh my gosh. I couldn't believe that I would be the one to still be alive. So whenever people come to me now and tell me that they're sorry for something that I've been through, I always tell them that I'm not,
Yeah. Yeah.
because so few people survive. If that had been anybody else, they probably wouldn't have survived. But
Mm.
I'm here and I've got a voice and I
Yeah.
can write and paint and I can talk about everything
Mm.
that's happened and I can raise this awareness and I can help to pull people out of these dark places and show them that there's a possibility for a better future ahead of them if they're willing to take control of their own trauma responses and their
Mm.
trauma recovery and fight back against it.
Oh, Amanda, thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm sitting with a lot over here, right? I hear trauma stories frequently, right? This is my job. I have just heard your story as a human. I have my own, right? My own traumas. there is so much wisdom in what you are sharing. And there's so many pieces that I want us to take and just expand on a little bit. First off, I've got this part of me that's right. Like you have a lifetime of surviving, right? Since you were a child, surviving, being objectified, not personified. And you are in the 2% that has the capacity to survive this experience, right? One of the things that we are talking about, yes, on this podcast, but yes, in particular in this episode, is the triggers that come with this, that trauma response. I have the way that I express it and explore it with people as I use an imagery around it. I say it's like a button that exists within you, right? Just because you've been through something really difficult actually doesn't mean that it was traumatic for you, right? You can have had I'm going to use a car accident, right, in this case, and not have trauma from that. Some people, it will sit in their body as the button will exist. They'll have triggers around material that's associated with that event, right? And so I invite people to think about, if you are being triggered by things, if you are holding on to feelings that are not serving you, right? Big emotions, right? And they're all not from responding to things that are presently happening to you, because usually by the time people get to talking to me, they're no longer in danger, right? It's just really scary. It's really scary because the trauma still lives in the body and says, remember this dangerous thing that happened. The danger has passed. Now what it is terrifying, potentially scary material that we have to learn how to process so that button doesn't exist the same way it did when we were first harmed. How do you explain triggers and trauma when you're working with someone? How do you explain it for yourself in your human experience? You mentioned some emotions. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Right. Through my research, I've kind of compiled my own list of trauma reactions. Most of them are things that I have personally experienced. And when I break them down into smaller subcategories under all these different trauma reactions, I have a list of over 60 different things. And I go through these with people and say, do you experience this? And I present it to them. When we talk about it, I will give them a scenario of, I don't know, something that's happened to me where there was no reason that I should have overreacted the way I did, yet I did. And when I recognized it, I understood where that came from, and I started to connect that.
Yes, there's no reason for that quote unquote overreaction. We look at this and I say, are we responding in the present moment, right? Am I responding in the present moment, or am I actually reacting to something that is bigger and older than this moment?
Right, exactly. And if we can isolate those things and figure out what it is that our brains are telling us, this is what we need to do in moments like this, we can learn not only what the long-term consequences are of not fighting back against those things, which they are various and huge, but also healthier ways of being able to fight back against them. If you find yourself getting really upset over somebody who talks over you, you can pause the conversation and have a conversation with them. Even though we might fear that confrontation, we can still have this very present moment where we can talk to them and say, we should talk about this. Give me just a moment. I've got some stuff that I need to give out. And please don't interrupt me. I'm only going to be 2 minutes, and then we can discuss what it is that I put out there. Being able to frame it.
Oh, yes. Say that
being
again,
able
Amanda?
to frame it and break it down like that helps people to process their own thoughts, their own emotions, and then helps the other person to sit and listen to them and give them the space that they need to hear.
Ding, ding, ding. I love what you're sharing. In my head, I'm imagining we've got this like landscape of our life, right? And on that, you said there's like these points, these like trigger points, right? That you want to work through. You want to figure out what is the response that's happening as we go there, and how can we work through it so we're not fighting against it necessarily. This like negative way of like trying to cut it out is what I usually say. Like, you can't cut that out. It popped up because it's trying to help you survive, and yet it's become maladaptive, right? Or maybe it's always been maladaptive, right? So how do you learn how to engage with it differently so that you, what I say, like redefine your relationship with that, right? How do you redefine how you're expressing and showing up?
Right.
It's just so much gold in what you were sharing. That reframing and being able to own the truth, which is if I know this is a trigger, right? What you said is if I know somebody talking over me is a trigger, right? And I can ground myself first. That was the first thing you said. You said take a pause, right? Pause, ground yourself first. So all my listeners out there, right? Amanda knows this, right? You ground yourself first. I heard to be able to express what you need, right? To be able to communicate that, right? Here's what I need right now, which is really, I'm setting a boundary, right? I'm setting the boundary of what I need and I'm telling you about it. So we're not going to be surprised. This isn't me trying to, put you down or minimize you or take away space from you. I'm telling you, this is what I need so that I can communicate effectively with you. Right? And people who are well and have capacity for this, they're going to give us that space. If somebody doesn't have capacity for us, maybe that's a different conversation, right?
Right. Yeah. That's when you start implementing your healthy boundaries.
I love healthy boundaries.
So I'm working on a workbook series right now, the Growth from Darkness series. The first book came out earlier this year, and it's about the stages of trauma. And as you're aware, they mirror the stages of grief, and that's because we are grieving for the person that we would or could have been. When we go through a trauma, it changes who we are, and it's going to constantly continue to change who we are and who we're going to be in the future. So we have to go through the process of being able to grieve for the past potentials, but we also have to recognize that there's future potentials too. You can turn into somebody else entirely. I spent the first 38 years of my life as a doormat. I am certainly not a doormat now. And I celebrate the new potential for my life.
Amanda,
I did grieve.
You just gave us this incredible image, and there's so much in this that I want to pop in on. We've got the grieving process, right? The stages of trauma, which by all means, right? Feel free to tell us in just a minute if that's the direction you want to head, right? But as I'm hearing you talk about these stages of trauma, they mirror the stages of grief, and it's because we're grieving the life we could have had. Trauma disrupts reality. Right? It says the world you thought was going to exist doesn't exist anymore. Right? It's like, that's scary. That's terrifying. Right? I had a mentor who described it. And I'm sure in many books now it's been described as like all the ways that you thought the world was filed and you had all these filing cabinets. It's like, so the trauma comes in, knocks them all over. The files are everywhere. You don't know what papers belong in which folders, where the folders are supposed to be compartmentalized. And all of a sudden the world looks very chaotic, looks very unsafe. Right? And so I think about this, the healing that can happen when you, Amanda, shared this, the grief over the loss of the self that could have been. And I think about the healing that can happen when we're willing and able to address the relationship between ourselves and ourselves, like but me and me, not me and my abuser, not me and the trauma that happened, but specifically my relationship with myself. And being able to speak with that part even, right? We in drama therapy now, we bring in literal characters and roles, and you can do that in letters, and right? But drama therapy is not limited to that, and we're not limited to that, right? As human beings. So
Right.
I love that you're bringing this in, this like your relationship with yourself, and the healing that can occur, because I have so many people, and I'm sure, you can speak to this, who believe that they can't heal. They'll always have PTSD. They'll never be able to heal from it. That's just how it'll be. Or I would have to speak to my abuser. They would have to say they're sorry. We do not need those things to heal. In my professional lived experience, and Amanda, I want you to give it to me real and straight if you feel differently. What we need is to own our truth. My abuser can't own my story anymore. I need to learn how to own my story, right? My story can't live in somebody else's perspective of my trauma. I have to be able to own what is mine. And so, gosh, when you said earlier, when somebody says, I'm so sorry for what's happened to you, don't be sorry for me, baby. This is my story and I own it. You can't be sorry for anything, right? I can't be sorry.
Absolutely.
It's my story.
And we have to stop looking for that apology from the abusers. These are the people who injured us. Why would we put our own healing and mental health back in their hands again?
I'm going to repeat that back. Why would we invest that? Why would we even expect that we could invest that in someone who has done us harm? That's a bad investment. Right? Yep. It's not an investment that I would say it's a risky investment. I don't want to say it's bad or good, right? That is a risky as hell investment. Okay, y'all? We can't expect that. We just can't, right? If they knew how to heal and could help, right, it would have happened in the first place. It's a risky investment. We have to know how to take control of our healing journey and our recovery process.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Amanda, there is so much here that we could say and lean into. Oh my gosh, you're the kind of human being who I'm like, can we do an hour-long episode? Can we just keep going? Because you're so grounded, you possess so much information. And I don't mean in the sense of like, as an expert, you have this one way of doing thing, and this is I mean, you in your lived experience as a human being, you are so present with your story. Your lived experience is truth. You share this. I feel that you are able to not only own your truth, but support other people, right? Even me in this moment, in owning the truth of what is, not the story that we tell ourselves about what should be. Gosh, that's so important.
And we need to avoid shooting all over ourselves anyway.
But I'm gonna put on a shirt next, right? I always say flag the shoulds, but you heard it from Amanda Blackwood, folks. Stop shooting on yourself. Amanda, we're coming to the end of the episode. I wish that we had more time. Again, this has been so valuable for me. I hope it has been valuable for you, and I know it's going to be valuable for these listeners. What are you taking away as we've set out on this journey to transform hard conversations into teachable moments? What do you feel is present with you now?
I think I'm building a bit more confidence that, yes, I do have the message that's available here to be able to mentor people out of these dark spaces. I know that I can, but I still, even now, as a trauma reaction, still battle with imposter syndrome. After our conversation, I feel a little bit more bolstered. I know that I've got something of value. I know that there's somebody out there that I can help. And if I can help just one more person, it is an addiction. Just one more, just one more, just one more. Just want to help one more person. Then I will feel even better about what it is that I'm doing and why I have put all this work into it and what it is that I'm trying to accomplish in this world.
Your message is so important. I am sending you energy to continue to share it in the way that, yes, bolsters you, as well as that one more person who it can bolster as well. This is so incredibly important, in particular for all of us who are walking around with that darkness and we don't even know it. And it is wreaking havoc on our lives. It's wreaking havoc on us. This is so, so important, these conversations. So I thank you for bringing a light to this conversation. I thank you for bringing your light to share this on the podcast. When it comes to, I also like to share it, that transforming hard conversations into teachable moments. I think what's sitting with me, of the many things that are sitting with me from this episode and this sharing, this moment that we're having, is so human, is partially the courage that it takes to own this as a human story, right? You just shared very vulnerable, right? That vulnerability of, even now, I still have, right, that imposter syndrome, right? Even as a professional and a trauma survivor and a trauma, I also still have that feeling. No, you've got to back down, Nina. You can't stop. Inner voice that's trying to protect me from something that is actually not dangerous. It's just scary. Somebody may not understand the message. Somebody may be too afraid. They may go back into darkness. Somebody may say that I'm lying. It is my truth. I have found my own healing process, and I am working with other people to heal, right? That is what I am hearing from you as a human being. And what I'm hoping will resonate with others is the power of owning your story. Even when there's abuse in it, even when there's Trump, the power of owning your story. Don't let them have it. It's not theirs.
Absolutely. And we take the control and the power away from them when we share it as our own story and not theirs.
Yes, yes, yes. And this is true, y'all. This is literally on the surface true, right? If you own your story and you're able to talk about it, they can't, right? They don't own it anymore, right? You have a voice, you're taking up the space, but the value internally of knowing that your story is your story, and you don't hear the abuser's story anymore. You don't hear other people's story anymore, because you have continued to own your truth and own your space, man, I don't think you can put a price on that type of freedom. That is freedom. Which brings me to, I know we're supposed to be wrapping up, but you did touch on this one other bit that I find is so triggering for people. And it's the idea of forgiveness and what that means. Do you have a few more minutes, Amanda?
Absolutely.
For my world, and I'm going to pass the ball over to you in just a sec so you can share. In my world, the experience that I have for people is this expectation around what forgiveness should look like. And there we have again flagging that word, that forgiveness means I must be able to say, they are resolved of all their, harm doing to me. And I'm going to say that they haven't done anything to me and I'm going to treat them as if nothing has ever happened. That is not my version of forgiveness. That sounds like, I think about the image you said earlier, the doormat life, that disempowered life of giving that power to somebody else actually is what that sounds like to me. That's not what I think of when I think about forgiveness for my healing, forgiving the parts of myself that I still hear or that exist within me that are not my story, right? There's somebody else's story about how I should have been harmed. That's not my story. That's their story. So I want to pass the ball over to you. When you consider this very valuable idea of forgiveness as you see it, and to each their own out there, just so we're clear, right? But Amanda, how do you see forgiveness?
Forgiveness is a softness that we will never understand. It is letting go of the anger and the frustration, and not just for the other people that may have hurt us, but for the circumstances in which we found ourselves and for the actual hurt itself. And most importantly, for that anger and that bitterness and that guilt that we carry inside ourselves for ourselves. When we forgive, it's not just telling somebody that it's okay.
Yep.
It is taking that anger that has looked like somebody scribbled harsh lines all over a paper and taking that and just painting over it with white paint and giving yourself a brand new blank canvas to work with. You have a beautiful world filled with colors. Use them and create something special and precious to you. Let go of that ugliness that's underneath all of that and move on to something much more elegant.
Take that with you for all my listeners out there, this image that Amanda has just offered. The canvas, right? That white canvas, potentially, that clean canvas, right? That maybe at some point someone scribbled all over, right? They painted on it. They didn't have your consent. They didn't have your permission. And there it is. Their story exists on your canvas. And you say, you know what? I see that exists. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist. I see that exists. And I am going to redefine where that belongs in me, how much space that gets to take up on the canvas of my life. And I am going to introduce new spaces or figure out how to introduce new spaces, right? Get the tools to do that so that I can use more color, more creativity, and really create the life that I deserve to live.
The beautiful life we deserve.
The beautiful life that we deserve to live. This reminds me, and I'll say the last line here is when I think about, again, the landscape imagery, the canvas imagery, the painting and making your own, right? Redefining your own points in this. I think about this line that we say is the only way out is through. You can't cut it out. You can't, you can try and pretend it doesn't exist, right? But the reality is no matter how many layers you put on top of it, that canvas is still there, right? That trauma is still there. The reality of if it's still living in you, no matter how pretty it is on the outside, it is still there if we don't process through it to get to the other side.
And it's hard work, but it's worth it.
It's so worth it. It is so worth it. Okay, Amanda, this has been a Beautiful episode. I'm incredibly grateful for your time, your energy, and your wisdom and your vulnerability with us. Thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you, empowered human?
Just head to growthfromdarkness.com. They can also find me on Facebook. I'm very active over there. Facebook.com/Amanda Blackwood Survivor. And I've got 2 podcasts of my own. One is called The Survivors, where I interview other authors of their own trauma. And the other one called Growth from Darkness, to go with the website, that talks about the different trauma reactions, what the long-term consequences are, and how to fight back against them. You get a different one every week.
Get the tools that you need out there, people. Get the tools that you need to heal the humanity within you. It can only do you good and then ripple out and do others good. Let's do this thing. Amanda, thank you so much for sharing those resources. They will, of course, all be in the show notes. So if you didn't hear it, listeners, just scroll on down. It'll be in the show notes, I promise. And are there any parting words before I move to close this episode, Amanda?
My favorite parting words is Friedrich Nietzsche is dead. Stop believing that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. You've already got the strength in you. You just got to dig deep and find it.
You got to dig a little deeper, for everyone who out there is a Disney fan. Yes. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
For everyone else out there, thank you so much for listening in and being willing to explore your triggers as a human being. If this episode in particular with Amanda has been helpful, please share the episode. That's the best way to get the dialogue going. And literally, in the case of this episode, move some light into those spaces of darkness. We like to shine light, and then we realize it's not necessarily a monster in the corner anymore. It might just be a really big shadow. It might just be something that we really need to clear out. The only way out is through. Okay. Get the tools that you need. Amanda has given us so many resources. Please go to the show notes, click them and utilize them. Make them work for you, empowered human. Okay. Make them work for you. That is everything I've got to share today. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. And we will see you next time. So stay curious.